So I feel like a lot of people are confused on like why are so many Americans brainwashed by the American government, especially people in other countries. But when we talk about propaganda in American politics, I think it's so important that we talk about language, because the way things are worded is so intentional. The way they explain things, the way they label things, it's all to create a specific perception. No matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat, we're all brainwashed. Like if I say doggy instead of canine, you're picturing two completely different things, even though it is the same thing. Now, applying that to politics, right? Right now, everything going on with Iran, notice how the news is never saying the United States just bombed Iran. It's always the United States has carried out military strikes or precision strikes. But in reality, we're talking about a large scale military attack. Bombs are being dropped, infrastructure is being destroyed, people are being killed. Calling it a strike sounds controlled, strategic, almost clean. But a bombing is exactly what it is. And once you start noticing it, you don't unsee it. So like another example is when we talk about immigration, you'll hear things on the news like, oh, there are human rights concerns in these migrant detention centers. But what does that actually mean? Are people being mistreated? Are people dying in custody? Are families being separated? They keep it vague on purpose so that you don't feel the full weight of what is happening. Even something like the defense budget instead of military spending. Ask yourself, what are we defending? Are they attacking Americans? Because calling it defense makes it sound necessary, like we're protecting ourselves instead of projecting our military power. And this isn't random, like I said, it's intentional. So there's a concept called plausible deniability, right? Where we use language that clearly will suggest something, but if you get called out for suggesting it, they're giving you enough wiggle room to be able to deny it, right? So for example, when people say things about inner cities, they don't outright say anything racist, right? But when we talk about inner cities with a negative connotation, everybody knows they're referring to black neighborhoods and communities without saying black communities. And then when they're called out for being racist, it's like, no, I didn't say that. You said that. And that's a dog whistle. So that's how and you can see how powerful language is even in modern politics. The slogans like "Make America Great Again," it sounds positive, but it's vague on purpose because it makes people fill in their own idea of when America was great, right? Or when Trump says Sleepy Joe instead of Joe Biden, or Crooked Hillary instead of Hillary Clinton. Those aren't policies, they're branding tactics. But once you hear them enough, even if you don't know why Hillary's Crooked Hillary, that shapes how you view that individual without needing any deeper explanation. So like when we call immigrants undocumented, it makes you think of paperwork. But when you call them illegal aliens, it makes you feel like they're not human. They're criminals, they're outsiders, threats. It's the same person, but it's a different reaction. And when you have phrases like the war on terror, who's going to oppose that? Because nobody wants to be on the side of terrorism. But that wording made it really easy to get Americans on board with war after 9/11 because so many people were scared. Post 9/11 propaganda had Americans associating Muslims with terrorism. And that fear made everything that we did to the Middle East feel justified. And here's the part they don't get into. They won't teach you in school about the letter to America by Osama bin Laden because it would contradict everything you've been taught about 9/11. And I'm not saying you have to agree with it, but if you actually read it, you'll understand that from Osama's perspective, the United States and Israel were the ones being labeled as terrorists. So now think about that. If Americans were taught that side growing up, do you think that when we did our war on terror in the Middle East, we would have had the same level of support? Probably not. And that's the point, because language doesn't just tell you what's happening, it tells you how to feel about what's happening. And once the government is able to control how people feel, they don't have to lie to them anymore about what they're actually doing, right? Because people think that it's okay.
Just to take it a step further, I feel like people are reacting so emotionally to this white man's death because for the past 200 years, white people have conditioned every other race to fear them and empathize with them and sympathize with them. Because at what point should you feel bad that someone who spoke openly, strongly, true to his heart and culturally, saying that it was okay for this same level of violence to be done to everyone else that didn't look like him? And if even women were to go through horrific experiences, then that's just what they got to go through. But when he is a victim of his own judgments, all of a sudden, it's graphic, it's wrong, he was a father, he had a wife, and did everyone else not have these things? Did everyone else not have families? It's you're conditioned. You're morally compromised. If you feel like, oh, it's not right that it happened to him, that's so wrong, we gotta. But you didn't feel that way about everyone else has been happening to. Because did you know there was 2 school shootings recently? Were you saying these same things about those children?
As an American, there are some things that you can truly never fully understand until
you don't see it until you leave the US, how brainwashed we all are that we don't deserve more than what we already have. Being brainwashed is why we believe the low amount of money we make is actually fine. It's why people think, I'm just a bank teller or waiter. I could never make 6 figures. 6 figures in the US in 2026 is not a lot of money. And I hear you that you're getting by on way less than that, but that's what it is. You're getting by on way less than that. You're not thriving. In other countries, the majority of people are thriving. I own a small business that teaches people entry-level tech role skills, and my job, honestly, is less about teaching the skills and more about hammering into people's brains that you deserve to make a reasonable amount of money. If you're not pissed off about how bad it is here, it's because you don't know how bad it is here, so go watch that original video. Because in this case, ignorance isn't bliss, ignorance is holding you back.
Make America Great Again is nothing but a cover-up for the failure of U.S. propaganda. Since 1945, America has been consistently interventionist and just a fucking terrorist on the global scale, installing regime changes and applying a new form of neocolonialism across entire continents like South America and Africa. And before that, a good portion of our economy was built on slavery. This isn't even addressing the social issues or the rampant racism or misogyny that our country has consistently upheld. America has never been a great country. You've been consistently just repeatedly told that it is this great thing because we have a massive military and we're an imperialist nation. And now that that facade is slipping and people are realizing that we're just a military with a business model and we don't actually give a fuck about domestic quality of life, they're saying shit like, make America great again. But our greatness was based on situational circumstance. We benefited from a post-World War II economy where most countries had no infrastructure because of physical destruction that we were spared from because we're on an entirely different continent. That is what gave us our edge, and then we used that edge to manipulate the rest of the world and turn ourselves into an empire. That is what we are, a militaristic, neocolonialist empire. It's just so irritating to even think about that, like, we believe in this fictitious, like, fantasy idea of what the US is.
Story time over a cup of cacao. In 2012, I left the US. At the time, I had no idea how I was going to do it. I just knew I needed to get the F out of here. I was 28 years old. I'd lived in New York City since I'd graduated college, and I'd worked a lot of jobs that barely made me enough money to survive. And I was making like okay money, but barely getting by. There was one point where I was unemployed, and I learned how completely useless unemployment was. Especially because the minute I got a part-time job that barely paid the bills, I lost all the unemployment money. That was a wake-up call for what a lot of people in this country deal with every day. At the time, Airbnb was brand new. Almost nobody knew about it. So I put my little apartment up on Airbnb and started making okay money and realized, oh, I could leave for a little while. Now, I want to point out that this was a huge privilege. I had an apartment to rent. I also had friends I could stay with when I was renting it to even realize that I was making decent money off of it. But I left the country and I never really fully came back. I started primarily living in countries that weren't very Western. And I really started to see my American brainwashing in an entirely new light. I started to see how the stories that I was told about the world and the way other countries were and the way America was were all complete lies. And when I would come home, I would try to talk to people about it, and people would get legitimately angry at me. People that you would think were very educated, open-minded, even liberal people would get so mad that I was saying that I really didn't think America was a great country anymore. They'd like compare my experience to places like Saudi Arabia and be like, you're so lucky to live here. It was almost as if you could not even suggest that there were big problems and big improvements to be made without somebody trying to compare your experience as a woman to the experience of a woman in a country where women literally had no rights. Completely disregarding that there's a million other Western countries out there where women have a lot more freedom and a lot more autonomy and a lot more support by the government. Even in Thailand, a country I was just living in for 2.5 years As a woman, I have never felt safer in my life. There's so little crime there, and I had full access to affordable healthcare and abortion services. I have to say, being on TikTok and seeing how many other people share my views about America and the problems that are America and the scam that is America really does actually make me kind of feel like understood. But the truth is, I had to live out of the country to really get it. And I felt like I was someone who knew that already. I was liberal, I was educated, I knew the problems going on in the US. But when you live somewhere else and you actually experience what it is to not deal with that stuff, it changes everything.
Did you know that the US government has been utilizing psychologists to manipulate you for your entire life? I implore you to go watch the Century of Self documentary on YouTube. It will teach you all about how they manipulate your emotions to get you to buy things, to get you to be with certain people. You were programmed by the programs, aka the television. We're also programmed to believe that the science works. Did you know that most of the antidepressant studies have a huge margin of placebo effect? They're not going to tell you this, but once you take control of your mind, the power is back in your hands. Follow me so I can show you how.